Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for miniature wargamers who want stunning tabletop quality miniatures without breaking the bank. In this series, we'll show you how to save money on your miniatures painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And on today's episode, we're going to show you guys how to paint up the endless spells for your armies of Beasts of Chaos in your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Now, by following the tips and techniques that we recommend, will help you save over $134.08. And the reason why is because the materials that we use to create our cheapskate method will only cost you $26.01. And of course, that's assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time. And when you compare that from the materials you buy from Citadel as well as Army Painter, that's going to cost you $160.09 with a total savings of $134.08. So that being said, let's go and talk about exactly how to paint up your guys' endless spells to a beautiful tabletop standard. And the first thing we gotta do, of course, is to assemble our miniatures. Now, when it comes to assembling your miniatures, I actually purchased these secondhand, so I didn't really have much of an input on how they're actually assembled. So I'm not really sure exactly what kind of options are available for the endless spells because I did buy it secondhand. And when I bought it secondhand as well, the guy I bought it from actually put the like little rune bases on the bases of the miniatures, so that way it kind of creates like scenic kind of bases is what they did for that one. So because the miniatures were already pre-assembled ahead of time, all I decided to do was add some texturing on the bases real quick. And to achieve this result, all I did is I painted the bases with wood glue for the parts that I wanted to have some texturing to it, and then I dusted it with some sand that I got from my backyard, and I let it dry, of course. What this does, it creates a really cheap yet really organic looking texturing to your bases. So once that dried, of course, the next thing I do, I have to seal the base. So in order to seal it, what I do is I make a slurry mixture, which consists of a 50-50 mixture between water as well as wood glue, and I apply it like a wash all over the texturing, so that way when it dries, it creates an airtight seal that will keep the texturing from flaking off the bases. Now you could, of course, buy any of the texture paints made by Games Workshop, such as Astrogranite, for example. The only problem with that stuff, of course, is it's expensive. There's not very much of it, and of course, these bases are quite large, so you'll need a lot more of that stuff. And while my method is extremely cheap. So now that your bases have been fully dried out with your texture, the next thing we gotta do, of course, is to prime our miniatures. Now, priming actually does a couple of things. The first thing that priming actually does, it creates a surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. Unfortunately, if you were to take your acrylic paints and put directly onto dry bare plastic without any priming to it whatsoever, the slightest bit of friction would rub your paint right off your miniature. So, and of course, that would ruin the overall finish of your miniature as well. So priming takes care of that. The second thing that priming also does too is it also has a very large impact on the vibrancy of your colors. Now, if you'll notice, I went with a flat brown primer. Specifically, I went with Rust-Oleum's Krylon Satin's Dark Mocha. It's just a can of spray paint that I got at my local Walmart for about $6.43. And I just gave it the once over real quick at that flat kind of dark brown color. And the reason why is because what I plan on doing is I want to make these things look kind of ethereal, like they're being summoned up from the shadows, just because they're supposed to be spells. So I want to create this kind of shadowy look, and I was really inspired by the movie Legend, and I'll explain that a little bit more in detail when we actually get to our first dry brushing. So just do it once over real quick at that dark mocha, and we're ready to move on to our next step. The first thing we do real quick is a dry brush over the entirety of the miniatures for the most part. We're going to do a really heavy dry brush on this. And the reason why is because I want to create this kind of shadowy, energetic, kind of like coming from the darkness type of look with these miniatures. So I use Skyline by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart. It's really cheap stuff. Just put a really heavy dry brush all over the top of the miniatures that we have painted. And the reason why is because I was really inspired by the movie Legend. It was one of the Scott brothers. I forgot which one it was. It was a movie from the 80s. It was starred Tom Cruise in it. And I forgot the name of the actress who was from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but it's a fantasy movie, and in that film, the main villain, Darkness, which is basically like the devil, in the introduction of the movie, he's got like this blue kind of black light glowing effect going on his introduction, because he's sitting in the shadows and his eyes glow green. Well, anyways, I thought that was a really cool look, and I thought it looked really cool for these miniatures, and that's the reason why I decided to go with the color scheme for this. So to do a little bit more of the dry brushing, I decided to dry brush with some Dutch Aqua on top of the folk art that we did earlier, so that way it makes it a little bit brighter as well, makes it a little bit more vibrant, and then from there we're going to do one more additional layer of dry brushing. Now for this part we're going to use pale gray. We're not going to use pale gray for the parts that we did earlier. We're going to use it specifically for the energy and for the flames that are coming off the back of the giant bull, as well as that little bray horn thing real quick. So just going to do a quick dry brushing real quick with some pale gray, just to give you a good solid base coat to work off of. And then we're going to add one more layer of dry brushing directly on the flames that we did earlier. This time with just pale white, just plain old white from apple barrel paint. We do a quick dry brushing directly onto those flames, so that way it makes it nice and bright, so that way when we do our glazing for it, it has a nice glowing ethereal effect. And before we go any further, we're just going to finish up the black details on this charging bull creature. So I decided to use Pavement by Apple Barrel Paint. I put 2 thin coats directly onto the horns of the bull, as well as its hooves and claws, just because I wanted to have that detail being black. So next detail we're going to work on are on the flames on both the bray horn as well as on the charging bull that we're seeing here. Now to create this kind of glowing effect, we're going to use what's called a system called glazing is what we're going to use. When you do the glazes, you basically take your acrylic paints and you water it down with water and basically make it into a wash. We're talking about a 50-50 mixture of water as well as paint. Now what you do, of course, you apply this like a wash on the parts that's going to have the flame. What's going to happen is that pale white undercoat is going to bleed through the very thin paint that we put on top of it, kind of creating this kind of glowing effect on it. Now you do, of course, have to put multiple layers of this glazing, so it's a very boring process. I will warn you now. In fact, it took me 4 different layers of this glazing to put on the flames of the bull as well as on the bray horn. But if you do it correctly and you let it dry each time and apply it to the coat, it creates this kind of cool ethereal glowing effect, which looks really awesome. And I did add just a little bit more emphasis on the glowing aspect of the flames. We're going to do 2 more pieces of dry brushing. We're going to dry brush the green flames with lime sherbet real quick by Apple Barrel Paint. And we're going to do 1 more dry brushing with pale gray once again to kind of give that kind of glowing white light effect going on with the flames. And as weird as it may sound, most of our painting is done on these miniatures. We got to do a little bit of painting with some additional details, and we're pretty much done with these. The first thing we're going to do, of course, we're going to paint the teeth of the bull, as well as the beaks, as well as the claws of the flock of bird-looking things. And we're going to use Territorial Beige by Barrel Paint to do that. We're going to put 2 thin layers on the teeth of the bull, as well as the beaks of the birds, as well as their claws as well. And the last detail we're going to pick out real quick on these birds real fast. If you look here on the bottom, they have little skulls that they're flying out of. So we're going to pick out those skulls in 2 thin layers of khaki paint by Apple Barrel Paint. And of course, the last very fine details we're going to work on are on the ruins of the bray horn. We're going to pick that out with some Mermaid Blue by Delta Serum Coat. You can pick this up at your local Hobby Lobby. We're just going to do a quick tracing real quick at that blue paint on the ruins or along the horns, so that way they're glowing. And then lastly, on the eyes of the birds, we're going to pick those out 2 thin dots of Kiwi by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a bright neon green kind of color. We're going to use that just to kind of pick out the eyes. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but I also did the same thing with the giant bull creature from the Endless Spell Kit. And with that, we're pretty much done with the miniatures, so now we're going to focus on the bases. Now for the bases, what I'm going to use Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel Paint. And the reason why is because there's bits of masonry as well as ruins on these bases as well. Plus at the same time, I'm going to use this to match with the bases that I'm using for the studio's Beastman Brayher army as well. So we put 2 thin layers of our Tuscan Teal directly on the bases, and once it dries, we're going to start working on our dry brush. And the color we're going to use for our dry brush is once again Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. We're just going to put this directly over the entirety of the bases. As you can see, it brings out a lot of the texture that we couldn't see earlier, like the individual grains of sand, as well as the masonry of the ruined buildings that these guys are walking on. It also brings up a lot of the bas-relief sculpture that's on these bases as well. And once we're done with that dry brushing, we can now move on to our oil wash. So we're employing a quick paint method on these miniatures, so we're going to do an oil wash. We're going to do an all-over oil wash with it and do our oil washing in just one single stage. Now when we use our oil washing, a lot of people like to use RB Painter Strong Tone, which is perfectly fine. It's a wonderful product that is exactly as advertised. The only problem though is it costs $32 a can, while a can of Midwax Polyacrylic and Mission Oak does exactly the same thing, but only costs us $7.99 for that. You get that at your local Walmart. So I decided to use that instead. Now when you do your oil washing, I will warn you guys now, do not put the oil washing washing on the flames that we did, because otherwise it's going to darken it down too much. We're going to lose that ethereal effect that we did earlier. So we're going to leave those alone. What we're going to do though is we're going to put oil wash over everything else. So on the entirety of the bull, minus the flames, the bases, the horn, minus the flames and the bases. And we're also going to do the entirety of the birds as well as their bases they're standing on as well. Now the oil washing does a couple of things. The first thing that it does is it goes down directly into the recesses of the miniature and brings a lot of those details we couldn't see before. Things like the musculature of the bull, the individual texturing on the horns, the feathers on the birds, etc. The second thing that it also does too is it smooths out the transitions between our base coats as well as our dry brushing. If you'll notice, that chalky kind of appearance is now gone on our miniatures because that oil wash has smoothed out those transitions. And the last thing it also does too is it also darkens down the vibrancy of the colors that we use as well. It's the reason why we use such bright colors in the earlier stages, because the oil wash is going to darken that down. Now you will need to let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours. Otherwise, if you try to handle it while it's still tacky, you could remove your paint and of course ruin the finish of your miniature. So we're back to our miniatures. It's been 24 hours later. As you can see, it does a beautiful job of staining our miniatures and doing the oil washing. The next thing we got to do now is to rim our bases. And for this, we're going to use 2 thin coats of territorial beige or apple barrel paint. And the reason why is because the same basing motif I use for the entirety of my studio's Beastman Army collection, and I wanted to, of course, match the rest of the army. The very last stage, of course, which is completely optional, is to do a matte varnish spray all over your miniatures, just because that oil wash will leave a high gloss finish on your miniatures. Now, if you're a fan of that high gloss finish, you can of course skip this step, but I like my miniatures to have a more matte finish, so I sprayed with some Kyler matte varnish I get my local Walmart for about $6.43. I just sprayed that real quick to bring a nice matte varnish, and it looks absolutely fantastic. And as you can see, we have a beautiful tabletop finish for our miniatures, and by using all the materials that we use from our cheapskate total, you're only going to spend an initial investment of $26.01, and that's of course assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time. So now that we're done talking about our cheapskate method and how we paint up these miniatures, let's talk what you need to purchase from both Army Painter as well as Citadel if you want to achieve the exact same results we did by using those name brand paints instead. So this is the shopping list you need to buy or purchase from both Army Painter as well as Citadel if you want to achieve the exact same results we did by using those name brand paints instead. You'll need to buy a can of Rhinox Hide Spray for $24, as well as the colors Thunderhawk Blue, White Scar, Caliban Green, Cyberite Green, Morghast Bone, Baylor Brown, Moot Green, Eshin Gray, Rust Gray, as well as Ulthuan Gray, and each of those colors would cost you $4.55 a piece. You also need to buy a pot of Talisar Blue, Aethermatic Blue, those would cost you $7.80 for those. Army Painter Strong Tone for $32, Minotaurian Varnish for $24, and Army Painter Pacing Set, which would cost you $18.99. So assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time from both Army Painter as well as Citadel, you're talking about a grand total investment of $160.09 to paint up your miniatures the same way we did, but using up those name brand paints instead. When you subtract the cheapskate total of $26.01 and the grand total savings of $134.08. So you guys have it. If you're looking for a cheap way to save some money on the miniatures wargaming hobby, may I suggest switching to Treat Craft paints. After all, you get these similar results with a fraction of the price, and given these uncertain times, it's always a good idea to keep some money around so that way you have to worry about spending it on your miniature wargaming hobby. So that's going to do this video, you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. You guys' input is available to us as always. I am Commander Cheapskate. I will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.